Good morning. Welcome to another Simple Truth. Over the past couple weeks, I've really challenged you to think differently. The idea that if you think differently, you're going to be different. People are going to get a chance to watch you drop your rock. The people are going to get a chance to watch you do amazing things because you allow Jesus to fill in that gap. That people are going to get to watch you forgive as God forgives, not as humans forgive. Those are really challenging things. We have to think differently. It means in every situation, we literally have to put on that bracelet that says, what would Jesus do in this situation? And not just think about it, but actually do it. And that comes from actually getting into God's Word, looking at God's Word, and then wanting to apply it. A lot of us know God's Word, but then we kind of twist it. We make it say what we want it to say. And that's one of the biggest dangers with Christianity today, is the fact that we take what God says and then we twist it into what we want it to say to fit our purposes. One of those other areas that kind of ties in with all of this is this whole idea of discipline and vengeance. And you've listened to me talk about this on several occasions, and it's because it's very personal to me, but it means a lot to me. God gave us a very strict policy for disciplining Christians. For people who say that they want to be Christ-like, that they should be bearing the fruit. So we go to Galatians and we look at the fruit of the Spirit, and then we look at people who are claiming to be Christians. Not claiming to know God, by the way, not claiming to go to church, but are really claiming to be Christ-like. We look at their fruit and we evaluate it. Now God was gracious enough to give us the fruit of the Spirit, and right before that, the fruit of the flesh, and we can compare those two things. We can look at them and say, listen, your life is really kind of being in more of this one. You're more about yourself than you are about God. You see, God makes it super clear what his expectations are, that we're to love God and we're to love other people. And then he clearly defines what that love looks like in 1 Corinthians 13, what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. It's kind and it's patient. It's not rude, and it's not self-seeking. It doesn't keep a record of wrong. And that whole list helps us decide. And so as we hold people accountable, and God says, here's what's going to happen, that people are going to twist things. They're going to be just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So as much as you and I like to puff out our chests and say, listen, if we were back then, we would never have done this stuff. The truth is that on a daily basis, I look like a Sadducee and a Pharisee or teacher of the law. I take things that God has said, truth, that other people should follow what I say, but I don't apply it well. See, Jesus looked at those people and he said, listen, do what they say, but don't do it the way they do it. That's a really sad thing for you and I, because most days I'm in that exact same boat somewhere along the line. That God would look down and say, man, what Andy's saying is right. But how he's applying it, it's a little off. And in that application, in that misapplication, we're going to get off track, and God says that's where discipline comes in. So you and I are going to look at each other's lives, and we're going to say, man, somehow you got off track. Now, the problem is that when it's a little off track, we find ways to rationalize that and schmooze that and be okay with that. But when it's way off track, well, that brings about a big problem, because the further off track you are, the more people you're going to hurt. The more potential there is to do damage to the body. It works just like a human body. Now, there's a big difference between having a kidney stone and having a sliver. Both can hurt, both can do damage, both can make us ineffective in some ways. But there's a difference in the severity of it. But discipline for the spiritual sliver and spiritual kidney stone, well, they end up being the same way. You and I, in Matthew 18, are to follow a process. God says we're to lovingly go to the person one-on-one. You should not be holding people accountable that you can't go to lovingly one-on-one. That's part of the problem. is that we don't know people well enough to actually be holding them accountable, but we want to see them disciplined. We want to see them punished for what they have done. So we're to go to somebody lovingly, hoping that that comment, that little challenge, right, that rebuke is going to turn their attention back to God. Then we drop our rock and we let God deal with them, because now their attention is back where it needs to be, and that's the whole purpose. I mean, if we don't get their attention, then there's a process of bringing someone else and bringing the elders and then finally bringing the whole congregation. And then God forbid that they just simply don't get it. And then we kick them out of the assembly. But you see, you and I, we don't know how to do this process well as humans. You see, in order to do this process, we need the gap theory. We need Jesus. But most of the time, too much of the time, you and I, we think humanly of a godly process. We think and try to make sense of it our way. We skip parts of the process. We don't go individually, lovingly. We bring a whole mob of people to arrest Jesus. We don't go to people with a sincere heart of wanting them to turn back to God. We go with the intention of destroying them, with the intention of kicking them out. And we don't follow the last process, which is, listen, at the very last moment, in an effort to try to really get their attention, we kick them out of the body. Instead, we get people's attention back on Jesus, and we still kick them out of the body. And we make all kinds of rationalizations for why we do that. Paul warned a church about that. He warned them to kick a person who was off track out of the church, but then later on he had to warn them that they needed to bring that person back in, because it's not our human nature to do that. You see, we do something with discipline. We substitute discipline for vengeance. You see, what all of us want deep within inside really is to get vengeance. We want to get back at people. We want them to hurt as much as they have hurt us. We want them to understand how much they've disappointed us. We want them to understand the severity of what they've done. And somehow we believe that if we drop our rock and we turn them over to God, that's simply not going to happen. And so we're afraid of that. We're fearful that they won't really learn the lesson, that they're not really going to get it. And so we take that whole thing out of God's hand. We refuse to drop our rock until we think that people have been disciplined enough. We know that vengeance is God's, so instead of vengeance, we discipline. We discipline upon discipline, upon discipline, upon discipline. There's no evidence of Jesus continuing to beat up and discipline those that he loved. Certainly, there's one-time discipline. Certainly, there's rebukes. But there's no evidence that he kept piling on. You see, Jesus knew that God is the only one that is about vengeance. And his vengeance comes with long suffering. His vengeance comes when he says he doesn't want anyone to perish. But vengeance comes when people harden their heart and they just refuse to get it. And then God says, man, I'm going to have to do something about this. God's first reaction is not vengeance. When you and I sin, he's not up at heaven trying to figure out how quickly, how severely he can destroy us. God disciplines those he loves because he wants them to turn their face, their gaze, back to him. Get back in step with God. That's not what you and I want. You and I discipline as a substitute for vengeance. We want to make sure that somebody pays a price, that they understand how badly they have acted, how badly they have hurt people. It's not biblical. It's not godly. And again, I will remind you, the way we forgive and the way we judge is the way we're going to be forgiven and the way we're going to judge. There are a lot of people today who are acting as if God is joking about that. If God is just somehow going to overlook that. I shudder to imagine standing in front of God and him looking at us and judging us the way that we have judged other people. So this morning, let me challenge you. Not only with, are you willing to drop your rock? Not only are you willing to do the hard thing and really to forgive, to act as if you've forgotten, knowing that you haven't forgotten, to live as if you've forgotten, knowing that you haven't forgotten. But are you also willing to give discipline to God? Are you willing to follow biblical discipline, which is to turn people's gaze back to Jesus? Not as a substitute to punish them for what they've done. Jesus took that punishment. Don't shortchange what Jesus did for us on the cross by saying that it's Jesus and church punishment, Jesus and my discipline. Be careful of the message that you're sending people. Practice godly discipline. Do not, I beg you not to substitute discipline for vengeance.